Parnell back, and I'm going to go through the therapy notes with you this time. This is the slower one where I pause and take big breaks so that you can write everything down. There'll be a quicker review one coming up, but if you're ready to take notes with me, we'll jump into it. All right, so therapy, you got 3 modules in your book you got to read, 54, 55, and 56. I got the page numbers for you. So, let's see. I know I can hit hide, but I'm scared that it won't come back up and I won't be able to end the video, and I don't know, it freaks me out. So anyways, let's start with therapy. So the origins of treatment, we've talked about a little bit when we talked about the origins of psychological disorders and how there's a long history of efforts to treat them. And, the history pretty much until very recently was pretty harsh. Like chaining them, beating them, some of the medical things that they went through were very, very questionable, terrible, brutal, inhumane, stuff like that. And we talked about Philippe Pinel in France and how he moved to the more medical model and established medical hospitals and stuff. The person who's famous for doing that here in America is a lady named Dorothea Dix. You may have heard of her before. She is from Massachusetts, Maine, somewhere up north. And she was really, her family was very religious and wouldn't let her kind of do a lot of stuff. So she was very sheltered, but she was really all about helping people. She was a nurse in wars and stuff like that. I mean, she was very, very influential in this. And basically what happened is she saw how badly people were being treated and wanted to move to the more medical model as well and put them in a hospital instead of just an asylum prison type thing. And she was the big advocate for doing that here in America and getting mental health reform and, kind of making therapy and mental health not such a taboo topic and something that we can easily talk about. You may have heard of her too because the mental hospital in North Carolina was called Dorothea Dix, and it was in Raleigh. It's kind of right on the outskirts of downtown, Pullen Park, stuff like that, if you've ever been around there. And it just recently closed. They're actually making it into a big park in Raleigh and stuff like that. But the mental hospital within the past, I don't know, maybe 10 to 15 years or something like that has recently closed. And again, trying to get people out and about, living in society, living on their own, going to therapy and treatment on their own, or if it's more severe in just more of a typical hospital. So there are, and I need to add the clicks where they come in one by one. It'll be all right for this video, but I just realized I hadn't done that. So there are 2 main types of therapy. There's psychotherapy and there's biomedical. So psychotherapy is like therapy that you think of. Psychological techniques, counseling, going to therapy, talking it out with someone, having a counselor, a therapist, something like that. Biomedical is where you use medication, you use some type of medical treatment. There's surgeries, there's procedures that can happen, but the most common in biomedical is just medication. So antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication, stuff like that. It acts directly on the person's physiology. So if you want to write that down, you can. If not, you'll see it in a minute because those are the only 2 sections of this Google slide presentation. And the person providing care and the type of disorder determine what will be used, determine which type of therapy. Oh, it goes down here. Kind of hard to see. I might have to fix that on some. Determine what type of therapy or combination of therapy will be used. Let me move this out of the way up here. And it might be kind of hard to see under there. Didn't think about that. Maybe it's not doing it on your computer. I don't know. So these are your 2 sections if you want to write these down. Like I said, I'm going to kind of write with you. So however you organize this, your 2 sections are psychotherapy, and that's what this video is on. I'll have a separate video for biomedical therapy. So section 1, psychotherapy. And then section 2, biomedical therapy. And like I said, most actually kind of do a combination of both. Say someone had severe depression, they're probably going to counseling, going to therapy, meeting someone, talking about it, processing it, but they could also be on antidepressant medication. Same with anxiety, they're on anti-anxiety medication, but they're also going to therapy, to counseling on a pretty regular basis. So a lot of times it's a combination of both. Now, sometimes there's not really a pill or a medical procedure you can do to someone. Not everything's going to be fixed that way. So maybe psychotherapy is more common of the 2. So here's a crash course on psychotherapy. There's 2 crash courses, one on psychotherapy, one on biomedical. So watch them before you take the notes. If you haven't seen this, just pause it right here. Go watch the crash course. He does a good job of explaining the different types and then come back. All right, so types of psychotherapy, these go back to Unit 1. All right, you remember in Unit 1, one of the first things I taught you were the different approaches to psychology. There was humanistic, there was behavioral, cognitive, there was like the biology, that's going to go more in the biomedical, sociocultural, and there was psychoanalytic from Freud. All those types of things are how we look at therapy. So if you remember back, out of all those types, like you can't say one's right and one's wrong. Okay. It's just kind of the lens in which you view psychology. So as we've gone through this course, you may not have picked up on it, and maybe you have, but you're going to be aligned to one of these more than the other. You're going to view like problems people have or things about yourself or like everything we've talked about. You're going to view it in a certain way. Is it more because of medically what's wrong with you, biologically, or not even what's wrong, just about you? Is it more about your environment? Sociocultural, is it more in the way you think? Cognitive, is it more in the way you act and why you do things? And over time, you've been rewarded. Behavioral, is it more in like stuff that happened to you when you were a child or stuff that's unconscious or repressed? That's psychoanalytic. Is it more in just you becoming yourself and this like real self, ideal self, like your potential? That's more humanistic. So everyone kind of prescribes to one or maybe a couple of these strongly, but probably not all of them. And so, say you were going to be a therapist right now, you're going to perform therapy and you're going to try and help people looking at these lenses, like which way you view psychology, you view people. Well, that's also how you're going to view to help people. So, what a typical person would do if they had no idea, they might, just randomly go with what they find, on the internet or something like that. But maybe someone suggests something to them. Maybe they know a type of therapist. Maybe they remember back from a psychology class, things they like, things they didn't like. And you can seek out a psychoanalytic or a psychodynamic therapist. That's going to go with Freud. Now, on a side note, and this is my fault, I normally would have taught you Unit 7 first before Unit 8. But with all this craziness, I thought I was doing the right thing trying to get this in before we're out of school. And it didn't work that way anyways. So some of the stuff with psychoanalytic and psychodynamic, you're not going to understand fully. If you took honors psych, then you probably remember all this stuff. But a lot of psychoanalytic, psychodynamic will be in the next unit. That's also the same with humanism. The next unit is personality, motivation, and emotion. Personality is really all about psychoanalytic, and then motivation and emotions a lot about humanistic. So in these first two, you're not going to have a lot of background information, which is fine. Humanistic is about the human, the person, the potential, the real self. It's the one when I always described it at the beginning of the year. It's the one I call the sunshiny approach, like everything's happy. And I feel like the therapist probably talks in a voice like this. And like, what do you really want? And that kind of stuff. They're trying to get to like the you inside of you. And you're going to see when we talk about it, like they're just very nice, and nurturing. And that's why I call it the sunshiny approach. And sometimes maybe too nice. And people think you need a dose of reality or a real world check, or like that's not helping. And you'll see why in a minute. Behavioral, a lot about. The backstory. That was Unit 4. That was learning. That was classical conditioning, operant conditioning, B.F. Skinner, Pavlov, the dogs, the schedules of reinforcement. So you're going to know a lot about that one, which is what you would know about psychoanalytic and humanist. You would have that backstory if I'd done it, but anyways. And then cognitive, you're going to know a lot about. That was, when that goes away, the little black box. That was Unit 5 with the ways of thinking, memory, thinking, language, intelligence. You're going to know all that. All right, so if you want to write these down, you can. If not, these are going to be the next sections of the notes. There's also this thing which I do want you to write down, the eclectic approach. Let me tell you about it first. It is an approach. If something is eclectic, it's like a mixture. Like you talk about like an eclectic person. They're just like all over the place. They got all these parts of their personality. They're very interesting. If someone's room's decorated eclectically, like they got this and that from all over the world in colors and shapes and sizes, it's just an interesting mix, basically. So the eclectic approach to psychology and the eclectic approach to therapy is an approach to psychotherapies that uses techniques from various forms. So it's going to mix them up. It's going to mix up different types of psychotherapies, but it's also going to be a mixture and combining them with biomedical stuff too. And most therapists, as you see what's written on there, many therapists and counselors actually choose this method. It's pretty hard to just be a psychoanalytic or just be a humanistic and no medicine and no considering someone's behavior and no considering the way someone thinks and no surgeries. I mean, it's kind of hard to like get narrowly in because most people today aren't that narrow. And they think this is probably the best way. This is probably why it's happening, but let's broaden it, right? Let's open it up. Let's look at stuff. And like, could this possibly help? What if I change this? You know, kind of stuff like that. So most people are eclectic. Again, they're going to be mainly one way. So when I showed you those approaches at the beginning of the year, you were probably mainly one way, but you could definitely get behind the other ways. Like that sounded right and that sounded right. Maybe some of them you're like, it's not really my thing. But, you know, so if you were going to practice therapy, you would probably be eclectic. You're mainly this, but you can see how that affects, or you can see how this would help someone, that sort of thing. Let's write down our definition of eclectic approach. Trying to find in my notes because I've already wrote all these, so I don't want to write everything twice. Oh, there it is. All right, eclectic approach. An approach to psychotherapy is that I just like recopy over it. It's my trick. All right, an approach to psychotherapy is that you're gonna see the word psychotherapy a lot. It just means all the types of therapies we're talking about. Uses techniques from various forms of therapy. Am I clocked in? I do want you to write down, if you don't want to write the whole thing down at the bottom, put that most people use this. So most therapists today use this approach. Or this is the most common approach. There's a video you can go watch that talks about it. All right, so first I have to explain something to you, okay? Let's look right here. I've got two types written right here, psychoanalytic and psychodynamic. Psychodynamic is a new word to you. I've never used it all year. If you think back to the beginning of the year, that approach was psychoanalysis, psychoanalytic, just a version of the same word. Everything I'm going to teach you in Unit 7 is psychoanalysis, psychoanalytic, version of the same word. This is a new word, okay? They got the same prefix of psycho because they're based in psychology, but analytic or dynamic, they're two different things, all right? So psychoanalytic's the first one I'm going to teach you about. So make different sections in your notes because they are different. Psychoanalytic and psychodynamic, I kind of have grouped right there for this purpose, but like in your notes, you're going to have stuff about psychoanalytic and then psychodynamic. Here's what I want you to know. Psychoanalytic's the old way. It's the first way. It's Freud. He's a guy, if you remember back to what we talked about at the beginning of the year, he's a weird dude that you'll see in Unit 7. But he, you know, he was so outside of the box. He was so odd. He was so weird. He was so counter to whatever people thought at the time that it worked in our favor. And it brought psychology to the forefront. It made it popular. It made it cool. It made it a thing, right? Now it's a curriculum. Now it's an actual class. It's a thing. It's a degree you could get. And honestly, we do owe a lot of that to Freud. Had he not been so bam in your face, a lot of stuff you'll learn about in Unit 7, with everything he said and did, like people wouldn't have made note of it. People wouldn't have paid attention to it. It wouldn't have really taken off as this thing. So psychoanalysis, psychoanalytic, it deserves its place in your notes. It comes first. When I teach you about it, you're probably going to be like, what? Like the psychoanalytic approach to therapy is probably not going to make a ton of sense to you. And to be honest, I don't even know, you'd be pretty hard pressed to find someone today that practices this. Psychoanalysis is pretty much gone away over time because of some of the crazy things Freud says. Freud really focuses on sexual relationships and not just the normal ones like, you know, parent-child or, you know, all these. He's just weird. He's weird. He's not stuff that you and I like encounter, think about. Also, he's a lot with like repression and the unconscious and the way to free it. And you have this energy inside of you and it builds up and it has to get out. Some of his like thoughts that you're going to see are pretty like out there. So while it did bring psychology to the forefront, it's not something that psychologists use today because it's weird and it's out there. And so people who took like his core beliefs, like I do think a lot comes from, you know, your repression, or I do think a lot comes from your childhood. People that took his core, non-weird, beliefs and transformed it into something new, that's psychodynamic. So you can like get some of Freud's like perspective a little bit today, but it's going to be altered. So you could find a psychodynamic therapist. You could go to psychodynamic therapy. Probably pretty hard to find a psychoanalytic therapist. Does that make sense? So this is the original psychoanalytic. This is Freud. This is a bit out there. This is taking some of the stuff that wasn't a bit out there and making it more applicable to real life and really helping people and treating people in real life. And that's psychodynamic, and that is around today. And some people do like it. So if at the beginning of the year when I was teaching you about the perspectives, if you were like, yeah, unconscious, that makes sense. Like, yeah, what happened in my childhood? That's, why I am the way I am today. If a lot of those things like you aligned with, you're probably more of a psychodynamic, because once I teach you stuff in Unit 7 about personality with Freud, and I teach you some of his like the way we develop, and it's all like sexually based, you're probably going to be like, whoa. And you can see why it's out there, and you'll be able to be like, okay, yeah, Miss Parnell, that makes sense why psychoanalysis is not really around today. All right, so we'll go back to that, but I wanted to tell you. So first section of your notes is psychoanalysis. So I will tell you, but you will have to note for yourself, like in the notes, when it changes, because it's going to look the same. Just the word analysis changed to dynamic. All right, so psychoanalysis. For all these things, I start off with who the major therapist, major psychologist associated with this therapy is. So if you don't want to write the whole sentence, just, put the guy's name. So however you want to like title this is a new section, psychoanalysis. All right, so I got it right there. And start off by putting Freud. His name is Sigmund Freud. That's a picture of him right there. You will be very familiar with him. He is probably the main guy of psychology. He's not necessarily the father in sense of like the first person to ever do it. That was, Wilhelm Wundt with his experiment in Germany, and then William James really in America with his first textbook and first class and course. But Freud right there, he's way more popular than any of them. He's mentioned in pop culture. I'll show you that stuff when we go through Unit 7. I got little clips from TV shows and stuff. So that's Freud right there, if you've ever heard of him, Sigmund Freud. And when he explains psychology, he explains this thing he came up with called psychoanalysis. Okay, so let's get our definition of psychoanalysis. It is a long one. I'll write it with you. Psychoanalysis. All right, so Sigmund Freud's therapeutic technique. Therapeutic means therapy, so it's his technique to therapy. All right, Freud believed that a patient's free associations resistances, dreams, and transference. You don't maybe know what a lot of those things are. We probably know what dreams are. But those are a lot of things we'll talk about in Unit 7 too, but it's actually coming up in a slide or two. So all those things and their therapist interpretations, that should probably have a apostrophe. Their therapist interpretations of them released, it's a long definition, I'm going to explain it to you in a minute, previously repressed feelings, allowing the patient to gain insight. So Ms. Parnell, what does that mean? All right, so let's talk about it. That's a long definition. Let's break it up. So Sigmund Freud's therapeutic technique, we talked about that. It's his form of therapy. He believed that these things, free response, which you're going to see in a minute. Free response is when you just blurt out whatever's on your mind. I think it's actually probably pretty risky, right? But you just blurt out whatever's on your mind. Resistance is when you don't want to talk about something. So it's kind of the opposite of free association, right? You're not blurting stuff out. You're fighting it. You're trying to forget it. You're not answering the questions. You're lying, tiptoeing around it, whatever. Dreams, he was really big on dream interpretations. Kind of what you dreamt was a insight, a pathway into what's going on, your psyche, he talked about. And transference. So when you put your feelings on someone else, so come to find out you have all these issues, you know, he always talked about like mom issues, right? I think a lot of people probably do suffer from that, but not as many as, you know, it's been made out to be, but it's just an easy example, so I'll say it. So if you have like these mom issues, you hate your mom and you this, that, and the other, then you start transferring it onto the psychoanalyst, onto the therapist. And so he would say like blurting out whatever's in your head, fighting whatever you don't want to say, your dreams, and then putting your thoughts about someone on someone else, all those things together could like solve why you have this psychological disorder. And so the psychoanalysis or the psychotherapist, no, psychoanalyst, I was saying it right. So many versions of the same word. The psychoanalyst, the person who practices psychoanalysis, would then take all that information and basically use it to explain to you why you are the way you are. He called it introducing you to yourself. And you would use all that information. That's why they're sitting there making notes of all that stuff. And then they would put it together and they would like solve the problem, you know, find the missing puzzle piece that you couldn't find and explain to you. And then you get insight as to who you really are. Now, one of the reasons people don't like this one, and maybe even psychodynamic, is people don't like thinking like, I can't figure out my own. Like, you have to figure it out for me. Like, there's this part of me I can't get to and I can't figure it out. Like, sometimes people don't really like that notion. Sometimes people really do. And they're like, I really can't figure myself out. And I have to say it to someone else and they have to tell me what's going on. So it's just kind of whatever way you align. So Freud believed that in therapy, people could achieve a healthier, healthier, less anxious living. He assumed that, like you said, we don't really know ourselves. There's parts of us we can't get to. No matter how hard we try, no matter how much, when we're laying in the bed and alone at night and it's just us in our mind with our thoughts, you can't delve deep enough. You can't get to that part. It's cut off. It's repressed. You got the resistance, whatever it is. So that should say the goal, not Goral. The goal was to bring the patient's repressed, aka their unknown, things they don't know about themselves, feelings into their conscious awareness. Now make them consciously aware, make them know what's going on, what they feel. They could then gain insight to their disorder and could reduce their conflict. Wow, I have like 2 big typos. That should be the word could. Yeah, we might have a lot I might have to fix. Sorry. So the goal is to bring these parts of you that you don't know about yourself, that you can't get to, bring them to the surface by doing your free association and resistance and transference, by bringing all that, and then the therapist's going to give it back to you. Now you're consciously aware of it. Now it's in your conscious awareness. Now you know about it. And now you can solve the problem, right? Like now you can figure out the disorder, gain some insight, and figure out how to live a better, healthier life. That's kind of what psychoanalysis is. So if you want to write down that last part, pause the video right now and definitely do that. That's a good kind of summation too. So the psychoanalytic theory emphasizes the power of childhood experiences in molding the adult. I do want you to write that down somewhere. So childhood, super important. If you want to not write down the whole thing, that's fine, but make sure you get childhood is very important in like who you are today. So why do you have the psychological disorder? Why are you acting this way? Why are you feeling this way? That type of thing. Childhood is very important. Some people like this because they say, absolutely, what happened to me as a child, I can't seem to get over it. It really messed me up for the future, this, that, and the other. Some people don't like it because they're like, look, this happened to me as a child, but like there's nothing I could have done about it. Like I wasn't in charge. I wasn't the parent, or I was just a victim, or whatever it is. And they say, I don't like that something done to me is going to control me for the rest of my life. And there's nothing I can do to change it. It takes your control away. It takes your power of choosing your own life away. And, so some people don't really like it. And they're like, no, it sounds too like, too bad, sucks for you type of thing. Like it sounds too like final. Whereas some people really do like it because they believe, yeah, that is why this is going on, or I'm feeling this way, or I'm behaving this way, or something like that. He also used free association. So let's make sure we get the definition of free association. All right, so free association. That's what I was kind of just telling you about. All right, in psychoanalysis, all of the definitions start with in psychoanalysis right here. A method of exploring the unconscious. So that's the part of you can't get to. That's your unconscious. In which the person relaxes and says whatever comes to mind. No matter how trivial or embarrassing. Now, sometimes people don't want to say embarrassing things, and so they fight it, they tiptoe around it, they lie, they forget it, and that would be the resistances you're going to see in a minute. But according to Freud, you would have to release it all. Good, bad, ugly, embarrassing, not, you have to release it all in order to figure out what's going on in your unconscious. So here's how it goes. You don't have to write this down, but I'm going to tell it to you. And you've probably seen this before, heard this before, and you'll be like, oh, that's where that comes from. So if you've ever thought about therapies, like you go into an office, there's a couch, you lay down on the couch, put your head at one end, your feet at the other. The therapist is in there, they're sitting in like some big old fancy chair. I feel like it's leather with the little like, tufts that go in, I'm talking about. But the therapist is like behind your head. So you're looking this way, they're sitting over there, so you don't really see them because you're not on the couch like, oh, hey man, what's going on? So the therapist is out of sight, and the therapist, I feel like they have to sit there with their legs crossed. I have a book with a notebook and probably a cigar hanging out of their mouth. Ask you questions, and they prompt you on these questions you're supposed to answer. Now, sometimes you're not going to want to answer them because you're like, oh, that's going to make me sound weird or bad or it's embarrassing or I don't like it or, whatever. So that's when people would hit their resistances. But the therapist is supposedly writing down everything you're saying. That's free association. And then they're going to take that, everything you said, and they're going to take your resistances and everything they've gained about you and put it together. And like I said, introduce you to yourself and give you, kind of like an answer, how to solve your problems or whatever. So I think that's pretty much, I just kind of summed it up. Oh, the transference is so when you're going and they're asking you these questions and you're having to bring up these things about yourself, trauma, embarrassing, whatever, you're probably going to develop feelings, love, lust. That's what Freud talks about a lot, but also like hatred, anger, jealousy. He's not going to say you're going to stay neutral to your therapist. You're going to pretty much, based on what you're talking about, if what you're talking about is painful or lustful or whatever, like those are going to be what you're going to transfer onto your therapist. And then you're like, your therapist, you hate your therapist, or like you're in love with your therapist or something like that. That's the transference piece. And so they're putting all that together to, like I said, give you your answer basically. So resistance, we can write that down. So resistance in psychoanalysis, make that beginning again. The blocking from consciousness of anxiety-laden material, like stuff that gives you anxiety, type stuff. Because it's bad, it's embarrassing, whatever. Anxiety-laden material. So we've kind of talked about what that is a lot. You like my little picture here? That'd be kind of what it looks like. Interpretations up next. This is what the psychoanalyst does with what you say. They interpret it and then give it back to you. So interpretation. In psychoanalysis, the psychoanalyst, that's the therapist. We call them that because they're not just a normal therapist. They're a special type of therapist that specializes in psychoanalysis, which makes them a psychoanalyst. Okay. Noting of, they're taking notes. Supposed dream meaning. Supposed, because how do you really know what a dream means? You know, it's kind of subjective. I say, oh, that means this. Someone else says, oh, that dream means that. How do you know who's right? So supposed dream meanings, resistances, and other significant behavior. I guess if you were speaking weird or acting weird or start doing that, start doing this, they would write that down. It'd be like some significant behavior thing you were doing. And events. So if there's some major event you keep going back to, repeating, talking about, hung up on, you can figure that out. In order to promote insight. So this is the therapist taking everything you're giving them, putting it together, and kind of giving you, like I keep saying, your answer back. I know it's more complex than that, but it's like your insight to your psychological problem or your suffering or your behavior or your feelings or whatever it is going on. Transference, because we talked about a lot of these words, so I'll write the definitions. All right, transference and psychoanalysis. Probably got this down by now. The patient's transferring of the psychoanalyst, that's the person, remember the therapist, oh, that shouldn't be up, to, I need to go back and change that, to the psychoanalyst, because you're transferring it on to them, to the psychoanalyst of emotions linked with other relationships. And it kind of ends with this. Like I said, few therapists actually use this nowadays. Maybe what I explained to you didn't sound that weird or off the wall. When I tell you more of the backstory in Unit 7 with psychoanalysis, you'll probably be like, yeah. But just know that most people don't really use this today because a lot of the things that they're talking about tend to be like sex drive, like ways in which you mature sexually, sexual like urges. I mean, he comes back to that a lot, which is pretty wild to think about in 2020. Some of the things I'm gonna teach you about, you're gonna be like, whoa, ooh, yeah, yeah, you know. That's the fun we'll have in Unit 7. But definitely, if in 2020 we're freaking out about this, imagine what people were doing in the turn of this century. I mean, he published his book in 1900. So if we're like, whew, you know, things he was saying was making people faint, pass out, discard it, discredit it, all that kind of stuff 120 years ago. So that's why it's not really used much today. So if you didn't think it from that, I promise once you learn in Unit 7, you'll agree. So what ends up coming is psychodynamic. These are people called neo-Freudians. They took what Freud said and they spin it a little different. And they eliminate a lot of the sex stuff, but maybe they keep the childhood stuff, or maybe they keep the unconscious stuff, or they keep the this, or they keep the that, but maybe they don't think the free associations work or the transference. They think, that's crap, I'm putting my thoughts on you, whatever it is. So people they look at it a little differently, and that's psychodynamic. So note on here that the prefix has changed. And like I said, most people don't use psychoanalysis anymore, but psychodynamic is around. So the modern psychodynamic evolved from Freud's now extinct psychoanalysis. You should probably put that in some way. If you want to title your notes psychodynamic therapy, we're on a new thing. And the other one was called psychoanalysis, but I guess I could title it psychoanalytic therapy so that all the headings are the same with the different types. Let me go back and do that. So you might want to do that in your notes. But psychodynamic therapy, and talk about how it evolved from psychoanalysis with Freud. And then let's do a definition of psychodynamic therapy. So psychodynamic therapy is a therapy deriving from the psychoanalytic tradition, and it views individuals as responding to unconscious forces and childhood experiences and seeks to enhance self-insight. So that's your definition on that. So if we break it up, like I said, it comes from psychoanalysis, the psychoanalytic approach. And it keeps some of the not weird stuff from it, maybe the unconscious part, maybe the childhood part. And again, its ultimate goal is to like give you insight so you can figure out what's going on with your problems, your feelings, your emotions, whatever it is going on. So some of the major ones for this, and there's another guy I didn't put on here, Carl Jung. He'll be big in Unit 7. He's not really a therapist, so maybe that's why. Never mind. The main people here is a guy named Alfred Adler and a lady named Karen Horney. If you look at her name, you're probably not going to want to say it that way, but I promise that is how you say it that way. But it's just kind of interesting because she was against all that stuff with Freud and his treatment to women and all this sex stuff, and her name's Karen Horney. So there you go. You can sound smart when you say it. If you want to write them down, so Alfred Adler, and he's the top pick. Karen Horney, she's the bottom pick. So they were influenced from Freud's ideas. You don't have to write all this down. But they left out a lot of his kind of off the wall stuff, mainly all the stuff I was telling you about sex, but also you'll learn in Unit 7, he had this idea about id, ego, superego. Again, honor psych kids, you're probably familiar with that. If you're not, don't worry about it, but it's this battle we have within ourselves, like a good person and a bad person and like who we're going to be. They left out a lot of stuff like that. And they don't just focus on childhood, like Freud put a lot of emphasis on childhood, but they're going to focus more on like the theme across your lifespan and stuff. But they're still going to be kind of looking at that unconscious stuff, which is what makes them psychodynamic and not some of the other things you're going to see in a minute. So in therapy, the person does not lie on a couch instead, because it's not psychoanalysis. We're now in psychodynamic therapy. Instead, they talk to the therapist face to face like a normal person would, which is like, oh, that's good. The therapist's goal is to help introduce them to themselves. So it's still kind of the same goal of like, I'm the therapist and I can provide you insight to yourself and what's going on and restore your awareness about yourself, your own wishes, your feelings, show you that maybe a past relationship doesn't have to just be childhood based, but it does look at the past. But if you're older, there's a much bigger past. Relationships could be the origins of the struggle that someone's going through now, that type of stuff. Yeah, so that you have more than just the definition and the people's names, put something from like the middle of this talking about how the goal is to introduce the person to themselves and to give them insight. However you kind of want to sum it up. If you want to write that whole thing, you can pause it and do it. The goal is to introduce the person to themselves. Like give them insight to themselves. And there's a video on that. Now, before we move into the next type, which I want you to know is that type, psychodynamic, and the next type, humanistic, are both called insight therapies because they're giving you insight into yourself. Basically, kind of telling you things about yourself you didn't figure out on your own, you couldn't see on your own, kind of making you go like, oh, like, yes, you're right. That's it, kind of like bringing this stuff about, like, if you have a moment of insight, it's like the answer comes to you. So it's like the therapist is trying to like take everything you're telling them, give it back to you so you can have the aha moment and like figure it out, that type thing. So we do need to write down insight therapies. Just know it's not a type. It's kind of like a description of two types. So if you want to put, after we write it down, that psychodynamic and humanistic are insight therapies, because the others aren't. So make sure you know that these are. All right, so insight therapies A variety of therapies. There's probably more out there. I just don't know. That aim to improve psychological functioning by increasing a person's awareness of underlying motives and defenses. One of the other things you learn about big in Unit 7 with the psychoanalysis and stuff, and it is in psychodynamic too, is something called defense mechanisms that we all use, like these like things we all use to kind of protect ourselves, and they talk about that. So an insight therapy improves your functioning by increasing your awareness about why you're doing things, about these defenses you're putting up, these like motives you have, why are you really trying to do something, and again, give you insight. All right, so humanistic is up next. Now, you do not have to write all these down. If you want to, you can. I kind of want you to maybe write a little bit from it. So here, like the main focuses, focus is a word, tenets. I don't know if I can make that word plural. Main tenets of humanistic therapy. So they want to boost your self-fulfillment. They want you to be fulfilled. Feel good. If you're not fulfilled, like you're having a psychological disorder and stuff like that. And you can't be fulfilled if you're having a psychological disorder, but maybe if you got rid of the psychological disorder, you could be fulfilled. By helping you grow in your self-awareness, like why am I the way I am? Why am I feeling like this? Why am I acting like this? What do I need to do? How do I need to stop myself from doing that? Self-awareness and self-acceptance, like accepting that like you're not perfect and you're going to have these faults, you're going to have these quirks, and you're going to have these days, and you're going to have these like things you do, but like let's work on it, let's fix it, let's try not to like have it take over our life. Promoting growth, not curing the illness. They're going to even sometimes say like maybe you can't cure all these illnesses, maybe it's just a part of you, but like let's grow from it and let's manage it and let's use it for good instead of like debilitating, that type of stuff. Taking immediate responsibility for one's feelings and actions rather than uncovering the hidden. So whereas psychoanalysis, psychodynamic was all about bringing something out that you didn't know, humanistic therapy is not. They are about telling you, you know why you do this, you know why you're feeling this, you know that it's wrong, you know that you shouldn't, and like let's take responsibility from it so we can then talk about how to not do it and to be better and to move forward and stuff like that. They think that things you're consciously aware of, that's what you know about you and know about yourself, is more important than unconscious. Whereas psychoanalytic and psychodynamic focused on that unconscious things about you can't get to and you don't know. Humanism doesn't. They're all about like things you know, like you know this about yourself. Whether you want to admit it to me or not, like you know this about yourself. And they're all about the present and the future instead of the past. So where those two psychoanalytic, psychodynamic look at how you got here in the past, they're more focused on, okay, that was the past, but like, let's be real. I can't fix it. I can't change it. Can't go back in time. So let's change what's going on right now in the present so that our future tomorrow can be good and we can be helped and we can feel better. So it's just kind of a different way of looking at it. So that's what you're seeing. All these are different. It's not to say one's better or worse, not to say one's right or wrong. You're just going to have to kind of get the feel for yourself of like what you subscribe to, what you align with, what you believe in. And, you know, therefore, like if you had to get help for something one day, what would be the best way to help you? I mean, you know, I can't teach all my kids the same way. You can't help everyone the same way. Certain things work better for certain people. So if you want to like sum some stuff up from this, I do want you to get kind of, let's sum some stuff up from this. I want you to put self-fulfillment and self-acceptance. Self-fulfillment, self-awareness. You can just kind of write these out. These are just like parts of humanistic. And as long as you've already got your notes titled humanistic, all this stuff's going under it, you're good to go. Self-fulfillment, self-awareness, self-acceptance. Conscious over unconscious. So like what you're aware of. You don't even want to put unconscious, that's fine, but it's conscious, like what you're aware of. Whereas you wrote unconscious for the last one, you're writing conscious for this one. Put present and future. This is more about the present and the future. Again, you wrote past in the last thing, so you need to know that this one's about the present and the future. think that's about it. Uncovering the hidden, that goes with conscious, unconscious. And so they're all about conscious now. All right, so your major people here is Carl Rogers, who pioneered this therapy, and a guy named Abraham Maslow. So Abraham Maslow isn't necessarily a therapist, but he's really big in the humanistic theory and the humanistic approach. We'll also learn about him in Unit 7, because the first part of Unit 7 is personality with Freud, psychoanalytic. The next part of Unit 7 is emotion, motivation, and emotion, and that's where Abraham Maslow comes in with motivation and stuff. So he's still really big in humanisms in that, for psychoanalytics and personality. Humanism is in motivation and emotion. So he's still a really big person with it, even though he's not a therapist. Carl Rogers is a straight up therapist. So let's write that down. So let's write down Carl Rogers, Abraham Maslow. Those are your two main guys. Carl's up top, Abraham's below. And Carl Rogers kind of is like the father of humanistic therapy. I'd say humanism sometimes, but actually, for those of you who are like way more than me, or maybe you take like AP World or AP European stuff, there's actually been like a humanistic movement within time, and it's called humanism. I mean, it's like a form of art, it's a form of literature, poetry, like all that stuff that came about kind of with like the Renaissance and stuff like that. So anyways, when I say humanism, I'm talking about psychology. If you're like really smart and you think I'm talking about like can't even think of the authors, the humanistic authors and stuff right now. I'm drawing a blank. If you think I'm talking about that, I'm not. They just kind of have the same word because they're both focused on the human. So I'll try not to say the word humanism since it's more really a part of world history. I'll try and say the word humanistic therapy, humanistic approach, humanistic psychology, but if I do, that's why. So he's not the father of humanism. He's the father of humanistic psychology because he wasn't around hundreds of years ago. He's been around lately. So when he came up with humanistic psychology and stuff like that, one of his biggest things with therapy was something called client-centered therapy. So first off, he wouldn't call anyone a patient. So in humanism, you call the person you're helping your client, not your patient. And it's basically just more of a like, we're on the same level. This is a business transaction instead of a like, I'm here, I have to like fix you, or I'm superior to you. Like I'm well and you're sick, that kind of stuff. So he calls it client-centered therapy and he always calls them their client. So let's write down what client-centered therapy is. So it is a humanistic therapy. So it's like a therapy technique. Developed by Carl Rogers. In which the therapist uses techniques such as active listening, which is exactly like it sounds, within a genuine, accepting, empathetic environment. There's a little bit more, sorry, environment, to facilitate client growth. So let's break that down. All right, so it's a technique in humanistic therapy, and it has all these components like active listening, which you're going to see in a second. And basically, like I call it the sunshiny approach and stuff like that, but like the person's real. So they're like genuine. And the reason some critics come to claim, and it's kind of sunshiny, is they're like genuinely accepting, unconditionally accepting and loving. And some people might say, well, look, if someone has a drug problem, you can't just keep, loving on them. Like you have to give them some tough love. Like you have to kick them out of the house. You have to take away their money supply or something. Or they're just going to keep being like, oh, my mom, she loves me. I do drugs, whatever. Like, so some people think this is too nice, too sunshiny. And like, you can actually like, perpetuate the person's behavior, and stuff like that. And you're kind of succumbing to it and you're like not stopping it because your love just makes them think that they can keep doing it. So that's kind of a good side and a critic side to it. So you got to be genuine. You got to be accepting, empathetic, not sympathetic, not feeling bad for. Empathetic as in empathy, like I can relate to you, like I can get inside your shoes, see things from your point of view, that thing. Environment. And if you do that, that lets the client grow, aka the patient, grow and get better. It is a non-directive therapy, which means that the therapist listens and doesn't direct you on what to do. The therapist listens, they don't judge, they don't interpret, they don't tell you what you need to do, tell you how to solve the problem like they do, in psychoanalysis and psychodynamic therapy. They refrain from trying to get you to see the insight. They want you to see it on their own. They want you to come up with it. They want to give you all the tools so that you can make whatever decision, evaluation of it that you want. Roger stated that if the therapist is genuine and unconditionally accepts the person, like the person feels like they can tell you whatever, no matter how bad, embarrassing, whatever, and you're not going to be like, oh, okay, dude, like you're messed up. If they think you're just going to be like, it's okay, I love you, it's cool, let's work it out, let's fix it. No, it doesn't make me change my opinion of you, like that type of thing. So they would have a real deep connection, like friendship connection type thing. That would then like help the patient or the client deepen their own understanding, which then leads them to accept themselves. Because no one's perfect, right? You're not going to get through therapy and be perfect, be cured, be healed, be amazing. It's just like you got to learn to like manage some things that are going on with you, or see the upside, or try and avoid these things, or try and avoid triggers or environments or people. But it's not to say that you're going to come out of this like perfect or anything. And so self-acceptance is big for them because they want you to accept reality and you, and like you might have these things and it might not go away, and you may be more prone to certain things like depression or anxiety than most people. So let's figure out how to manage it and how to not trigger it. But we can't just pretend that like that's not going to always be a part of me. So I need to accept that, and then I need to figure out how to grow with that type thing. For this, maybe put something about how, well, no, I think that's actually an active listening. Yeah. Okay. So we're good from that. Rogers emphasized active listening. He said, here's what you do when the person's telling you something and they get done. You can paraphrase, like summarize it up. Ask for clarification on something if you need it. Like, can you give me an example of when you feel da-da-da-da-da? That type of thing. And reflect on it. He's like, yeah, I mean, what you're saying, that does sound frustrating. I can see why that makes you upset. I can see why you don't want to leave the house or sad or stuff like that. So you kind of like summarize it, ask for clarification if needed, and then reflect on it. And those are the tenets of like active listening. So let's write down active listening. Oh, there it is. All right, active listening. Emphatic listening. I need to check. See if that's really the word. Probably spelled that right in your book. In which the listener echoes, restates, and clarifies, which is part of client-centered therapy, like being focused on that person and helping them. So it's listening, you echo, you restate, you clarify. But you're hearing them. You're not butting in. You're not saying, well, I think you should do this. You're not solving the problem. You're not offering suggestions. You're just letting them get it out. And then you're basically coming back around saying, I see what you're saying. Is this what you mean? And then from that, you can kind of help them come to their own conclusions type thing. Rogers also stressed the importance of a therapist using unconditional positive regard. So you know what that means. You know what it means to unconditionally love someone, like a parent unconditionally loves their child. Like I can get really mad at my child if they go about in life, grow up and do some terrible thing. I could be super mad at them, but I wouldn't be able to turn off the love switch. You know what I'm saying? Like if you unconditionally love someone, then you can get mad, you can get frustrated, you can be sad, you can be hurt. But like deep down, you still care for them, you still wish them the best, you still love them, they're still like a part of you. And so he says you kind of have to be like that as the therapist, a little bit to the patient, or to the client, like kind of that parental relationship, not the parental relationship in which I'm like telling you what to do, but the parental relationship in which I am here for you no matter what. Always come to me, you can tell me anything. It doesn't mean I'm gonna like it, but I'm going to unconditionally support you, and I'm going to unconditionally love you, and I'm always going to be here for you, and I'm going to help you figure it out type thing. That's the type of relationship. So humanism's real big on the relationship aspect, the relationship piece of a therapist, where some of the others aren't. You know, some of the others think you could get this guy or this girl and they can help you and yada yada. Whereas he's like, it's me and you, and it's our relationship that we make together that can drive this for success or failure. And so he would use unconditional positive regard. This is where some critics say, like I was telling you earlier, like, well, if you just keep doing this, you know, then you're just there's a word for it. Y'all are probably screaming it at me. It's like where you like aid and abet the person. You're as soon as I get done filming, I'm gonna think about it. You're perpetuating it. There's like a real word people use. Anyways, so unconditional positive regard. So let's write that down. Unconditional positive regard. So this is a caring, accepting, accepting, non-judgmental attitude, which is kind of hard to do sometimes, right? Because sometimes you'd be like, somebody tells you something, you're like, I'm trying not to judge you, but like, I am. So non-judgmental attitude, which Carl, not old Carl Rogers, I gotta change that, Carl Rogers believed would help clients develop self-awareness and self-acceptance. And there's some videos on that. There's a famous video of Carl Rogers and this client of his, Gloria. And so you can see him in action doing active listening and displaying unconditional positive regard and stuff like that. If you want to watch that, he has an article or something maybe too. All right. Kind of just another little recap on both of those insight therapies. They believe that those psychological disorders diminish as your self-awareness grows. So as you learn more about yourself, you can fix your problems type thing. So psychodynamic would say like the problem subsides when you gain insight into your unconscious or what's been unresolved inside of you. Whereas a humanist would say things like your problems are going to subside when you get in touch with your feelings and kind of figure that part out. You can write that if you'd like. All right, moving on to the next one, behavioral therapy. So make a new section in your notes. Behavioral therapy. So behavioral therapy, let's write that down. What is that? Therapy that applies learning principles to the elimination of unwanted behaviors. You don't want to feel anxious. You don't want to have PTSD, whatever it is. They just try and condition you, basically. So you're going to know a lot about this because you know about a lot from Unit 4. You would have known a lot about the other two if you knew a lot about Unit 7. But anyways, so you recognize probably these two guys. This is Ivan Pavlov. This is B.F. Skinner. They're your two main people, if you want to write that down. I wonder if I have it. Oh, there it is. Down there at the bottom. So Pavlov and B.F. Skinner. Now, they weren't necessarily therapists, but the principles in which they teach, classical conditioning for Pavlov on the top, operant conditioning with B.F. Skinner on the bottom. That's what therapists then just basically use those techniques on people. So you don't need like necessarily a famous therapist. They kind of introduce the concept and then anyone can apply it. So they use both classical and operant techniques. Proponents of behavior therapies doubt the healing power of self-awareness. So they think some of that stuff we've already talked about, it's a little frou-frou, okay? And it's nice, but like they say, you can be aware that you're anxious, but you're still going to be anxious till you fix it. Like you can become aware, this is why I'm anxious. Well, guess what? You still got anxiety till you fix it. And so that's kind of their mentality. So they're more of the like doing, the seeing, the action. Maybe if you were somebody more subjective, more like thoughts, theoretical, languagey, maybe you like some of those others. If you're a little more mathematical, numbers, stats, do this, concrete, prove it, you're probably a little more behavioral because you can kind of like see that in it. So instead, behavioral therapists believe that basically your psychological disorder, your problems, whatever you're going through, feelings, emotions, whatever, is behavior that you've learned. So you need to replace it with a new behavior in order to get rid of it. Bada bing, bada boom. Really simple, right? So there's classical conditioning techniques. So if you want to start like a new little subsection in the behavior notes with classical conditioning, just like that was like a subsection of like the learning we did. Classical conditioning techniques. So basically, could a maladaptive, a bad, harmful behavior symptom, could that be because we've been conditioned to respond that way? So like a phobia, have I been conditioned over time to fear this thing? And now it's impeding my life. Now I'm not leaving my house. I'm losing my friendships, my relationships, my job, my money. And can you like condition me back the opposite way to where I'm not so scared of it? You know, can you make me like everyone else where I'm still scared of it, but it's not like a life impeding phobia or something like that. So that would be what counter conditioning is. So you remember moving through that like UCS, UCR, CS, NCR, US, UR, CS, CR, and we like kind of moved, you know, through the thing. This is like doing it, but like with the opposite. So you're still kind of doing the same pair something neutral, that's your new response. But now it's like opposite things. All right, so, and I'm going to explain what that means in a minute. So let's write down counter conditioning first. So you know counter means like it's a prefix for like opposite, like the counterculture, like the hippies, they were like opposite of the culture that was going on. So, and that's your little US history lesson if you didn't know it. Counter conditioning is basically conditioning back opposite. So behavior therapies that use classical conditioning to evoke new responses, and I think I have to pause.